We tend to think of the Industrial Revolution as a sudden, sweeping upgrade to human history, a clean break from the past where society woke up one morning and decided to build factories and steamships. That narrative was engineered at the time. Look at this 1900 sheet music cover, The Dawn of the Century. At the center, an angelic goddess of progress floats towards the future, surrounded by symbols of the age, the railway, camera, and factory. The rhetoric was blunt. This 1901 illustration draws a sharp line between the magic of East and West. On top, Aladdin builds a palace with a lamp. Below, a modern Western mechanic weaves his own magic with pneumatic tools. The true transition into the industrial age involved a slow, gritty rewiring of human labor that took centuries to unfold. Long before the first brick-and-mortar factory was ever built, Europe was already mass-producing goods. Historians call this phase proto-industrialization. It was a massive manufacturing system that ran entirely on human energy. Rather than gathering workers into one building, merchants relied on rural peasants. Entire families worked in their cottages, turning raw materials into textiles by hand. Across Britain, traditional open fields and common lands were being enclosed by wealthy landowners. Cottagers who used to survive by foraging and farming small plots suddenly faced starvation. Working for city merchants became their primary means of survival. This created a massive, invisible assembly line. Merchants purchased raw wool, took it to rural spinners to make the yarn, moved that yarn to weavers, and then passed the cloth to fullers and dyers. The factory system concentrated this existing human network, which was already stretched to its limit, and placed it under a single roof to be mechanized. Even when that mechanization arrived, the transition was remarkably slow. When James Watt improved the steam engine in 1781, his partner Matthew Boulton struggled for years to find buyers. Human labor was simply cheaper, and industrialists were hesitant to invest in expensive new technology. Specific bottlenecks in the supply chain eventually forced their hand. This is the spinning jenny, invented in 1764. By turning a single wheel, one worker could set multiple spindles in motion at the same time, drastically reducing the number of humans needed to spin yarn. The arrival of these machines triggered immediate resistance. In the woolen industry, women who had survived by hand spinning attacked the new equipment, and jennies were shattered as workers fought the machines. These laborers were engaged in a desperate fight for survival. In an era where sudden unemployment meant literal starvation, a machine that replaced 10 workers posed a lethal threat to a family's daily bread. The first casualties of the industrial age were local British laborers. Progress functioned as a brutal economic contest, where efficiency came at the direct expense of the working class. That contest quickly expanded outward. Before British factories dominated the globe, the international market for fine textiles was almost entirely controlled by India. To control this trade, the East India Company deployed a new kind of manager called a Gumasta. These were aggressive outside supervisors appointed to extract supplies from Indian weavers, often marching into villages with armed peons to punish delays with beatings. The Gumastas stripped the weavers of their bargaining power. They forced artisans to accept loans that tied them to the company, dictating miserably low prices that barely covered the cost of production. This chart shows the result of that policy. Throughout the 19th century, the Indian market was flooded with hyper-cheap, machine-made cotton goods from Manchester. You can see the exponential spike in British imports crossing paths with the rapid collapse of India's domestic textile exports. The toll on the subcontinent was massive. Faced with starvation wages, countless weavers closed their workshops, abandoned their ancestral villages, and migrated to find work as agricultural day laborers. The immense prosperity of the British industrial empire was built through the systematic dismantling of India's traditional artisan economy. That British monopoly eventually cracked. With the outbreak of the First World War, British factories were abruptly diverted away from exports and reconfigured to mass-produce military supplies for the army. This sudden absence of Manchester cotton created an economic vacuum inside the Indian domestic market. Local Indian industrialists capitalized on the shortage. Figures like J.N. Tata built massive domestic textile mills in commercial hubs like Bombay and Calcutta to replace the missing foreign goods. To staff these facilities, the mills absorbed the rural workers who had been displaced decades earlier. These peasants traveled vast distances from their villages to take grueling shift work in the rapidly expanding urban centers. Industrialization proved impossible to contain. The economic mechanism that Britain used to build its empire eventually armed the colonies with the tools to reclaim their own markets. As factories across the globe mastered mass production, they hit a structural limit. Once machines produce an endless supply of goods, manufacturers must convince a population to buy things they have never historically used. The solution was the development of modern advertising. Manufacturers realized they had to shape a new consumer culture, using familiar cultural and religious imagery to sell unfamiliar, mass-produced items. Both British and Indian companies distributed labels and calendars adorned with revered figures. Take a look at this sunlight soap calendar from 1934, featuring the god Vishnu. By associating the divine with a bar of soap, the manufactured product felt familiar and necessary. These calendars were placed in poor homes and local tea shops, providing constant, year-round psychological conditioning for a working-class population that, in many cases, could not read the text. Beyond the steam engines and factory lines, industrialization left behind a more permanent legacy: the modern consumer. Human desire was systematically recalibrated to ensure the machines never stopped running.